All right. Oh, hello. This is Talk Back. I'm Sheila, and we're continuing our conversation with Steven Goldstein, civil rights activist, and especially tonight, author, because he's written a new book that is very popular already.
I'm so happy about that.
The Turn On. It is called The Turn On, How the Powerful Make Us Like Them from Washington to Wall Street to Hollywood. Okay. So what made you write this book?
So, as I started to say in your last show, I was a lawyer for the U.S. Congress who helped put together hearings of witnesses. You know, just like we've seen recently in the impeachment hearings, there are witnesses who testify before Congress. And I started to take notes about what made witnesses effective in terms of their personality traits that would persuade the members of Congress in front of them to be moved on legislation. And I started writing traits that I called likability traits. So I would book hundreds of witnesses, and I took notes on, were they captivating, were they hopeful, all through 8 traits. And I developed a paradigm, and this was 25 years ago. Well, I had the oddest job switch because on a Friday, I concluded my work as a lawyer for the U.S. House Judiciary Committee, and on a Sunday, 2 days later, I became a producer for the Oprah Winfrey Show. So you couldn't think of a more dramatic career change within 2 days. And at Oprah, I started to take notes about what guests got the highest ratings, the most likable guests, and I started to write another list of traits, and they turned out to be the same traits, what made people likable. And that was 25 years ago, over 2 jobs. And I said, okay, someday I'm going to write a book. Well, life happened, and it took 25 years. But over the course of my career, which has been in television, in politics, a little bit in business through various roles, I started to take notes, not just on what makes people likable, but what makes public figures likable, through the same 8 traits paradigm. And in this book, The Turn On, I write about 300 public figures and what makes them likable. There have been other books before many on how to be more likable, ever since Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's not new. What's new is examining likability through people we all know, celebrities, politicians, CEOs. So I often joke that this book it's a fun read. You can open it up to any page. Great bathroom book. Am I allowed to say that on
I
cable?
didn't read it in the bathroom.
Okay, no.
It was good.
Awesome.
I'll try.
You'll try. But it's fun. Like it's fun book. So.
But why is likability important? Is it because it can get you to do something?
So listen, as I write in the book, and let's look at politics, usually the more likable candidate has won a presidential election. Of course, there are other factors, such as the economy, and is the country at war or at peace. But likability plays a big piece nonetheless. Now, there might have been one exception. When did the less likable presidential candidate defeat the more likable one? And I think we'd have to go all the way back to 1968. When Humphrey and Nixon. Now, Nixon was never likable. And Hubert Humphrey was the happy warrior.
But you talk about in your book how he tried to transform himself to the, quote, new Nixon, and he went on laughing, and he said, sock it
He
to
did,
me,
and so here's what Nixon did. After he lost the 1962 race for California governor, he knew he had a likability problem. He was a very interesting man. I might not have shared his politics or his ethics or morals, but I thought he was a brilliant man. And he was a very introspective person. Apparently, that didn't stop him from getting into trouble, but he knew that he was an unlikable person. So he hired a producer from Jack Parr to make him more likable. All of a sudden, Richard Nixon started playing piano on TV as if he were Liberace. I mean, like, why is Richard Nixon playing piano on TV? Well, for the same reasons that Bill Clinton years later would play the saxophone on Arsenio Hall, to become more likable. And so a week or so before the 1968 general election, Laugh-In, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, which was the popular show at the time, like Saturday Night Live, except on prime time, asked Nixon and Humphrey to appear. And Hubert Humphrey, the happy warrior, as likable as anybody who ever served in public life, said that's really beneath the dignity of a presidential candidate. And Richard Nixon and his entourage did not hesitate, and he said, "Sock it to me," in a very, that was the show's line, in a very funny way. And after the election, Nixon and Humphrey both said that Nixon's appearance on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In is why Nixon won the election.
Well, of course, I would like to think there were other factors, like Nixon making a deal with the Vietnamese not to have a peace plan so he could get elected. I'd like to think it's because many of my friends, Eugene McCarthy, anti-Vietnam War friends, did not support Humphrey. He lost by a very, very slim margin. So how do we know if it's the more, what I call, and that you don't call, the more superficial stuff in life that gets people elected versus more substantial?
What I say in my book is it's multi-determined.
Right, okay.
I have a very middle ground.
Okay.
I say there are absolutely other factors. Likability is part of the mix. So let me say this. We talk about likability as maybe it's a little inappropriate or airheady or superficial to use that as a standard. Let me push back a little bit on that. A president has to be likable to get his or her program, God willing,
so when we talk likability, we're not talking about
it's a skill.
Affability. We're talking about having a personality that captivates you to listen, to take seriously what you say.
Yep.
Let's go back to Abraham Lincoln. In today's world of social media, of images constantly in our face, would he be elected in today's world?
Abraham Lincoln had low-grade depression.
Exactly. He was a depressed personality.
A depressed personality. And he'd have to get an extensive makeover. And somebody would probably tell him to shave his beard.
Okay.
And Abraham Lincoln, if he was authentic, would tell that media advisor to go shove it.
Of course, the Times helped because it was a three-way race, and so he was able to squeak in. But so that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Franklin Roosevelt on the wheelchair, would he have been elected if people knew his infirmities? And so once he got in, he was very likable.
Yes, he would have been elected because of, look, he was a very emotionally intelligent man. And he would know enough today to be authentic, which is one of the 8 traits of likability that I write about. So it's a different world today. He'd be very open about his challenges.
And the other thing that we're talking about is you worked at Oprah, you worked in the committees in Congress, and your job was to find the most captivating, likable, interesting people to illustrate an issue so that you could get law passed. We don't have the patience, and do we have the sustainability and the substance that we had when in 1858 Lincoln and Douglas stood out in the cold and the rain for 5 hours and talked in these debates and people listened? Are we more superficial, ignorant populace today?
You can't, here's my answer, Sheila. You can't make a generalization about the American people.
But we're looking for the soundbite. We're looking for the soundbite.
We are looking for the soundbite, including me and including many educated people. I don't think one is not intelligent, and I don't think one is not sophisticated because one would like to hear a soundbite. Or, for example...
Tell us what you did with Senator Lautenberg.
Okay, for example, though. So I agree with all of... NPR is a progressive radio network. Those who would argue it's not, that's ridiculous. It is. So I listen to NPR pieces, and as a former television producer, after about 2 minutes, I say to myself, okay, this piece is going on way too long. Its repetitiveness is outweighing its depth. So I'm like anybody else, and truth be told, when you speak to people, in a fast-paced world, people want their information fast. I don't look at that as a terrible thing. Unfortunately, for those of us who are progressives and Democrats, listen, Donald Trump mastered the art of quick communication and used it for evil purposes, certainly in my view. And Democrats are still learning that.
Well, we're behind the eight ball in doing that.
Right.
There's no
I mean,
question.
listen, I, without saying who I support for president, I certainly like Joe Biden. But look, he's a product of a different time, and I think he's a wonderful man. I do say to myself, are you going to finish this sentence within 5 minutes? I mean, you know, that doesn't make me an airhead.
Well, I wish you were counseling the Democrats, because the thing that gets me about Trump is he's in our face every day, and he is leading the conversation. Why can't we lead the conversation and he'll react to us? Why are we always reacting to him?
I'll tell you why.
Tell us why.
And I'm somebody who has fought Donald Trump and his policies tooth and nail. There is some elitism among us progressives. Some of us couldn't believe that this man could ever get elected. Well, guess what? We live in a bubble. Guess what? The world is not Eastern Connecticut or Cambridge, Massachusetts or Berkeley, California, okay? The world has voters to whom he spoke. And the world had Donald Trump voters in 2016 who are not all deplorable. I think many of them had deplorable views, but I think many of them were yearning for a voice that would speak for them. And we just dismissed it. We didn't take it very seriously. We dismissed Donald Trump as a buffoon. Now, he is a buffoon. But that's our view in our bubble. He certainly got enough votes in the primaries, albeit in a right-wing Republican Party, but he got enough votes to say, wait, a huge segment of Americans don't think he's a buffoon. So we don't take these things seriously at all.
Well, I think that his popularity was due, and I didn't watch it, but I realize now how important that TV show was.
The Apprentice?
The celebrity is what made him,
What
as
made
much
him?
as anything else. Celebrity, I believe celebrity, anti-immigrant, the racism, and what I call the authoritarianism, which is a streak that a lot of people like in this country, and that's what they like about him.
So it's interesting. So in one of my previous jobs was being executive director of an organization called the Anne Frank Center for
Yes,
Mutual
you are
Respect.
talking, okay.
So what most people don't know is that there are lots of Anne Frank organizations around the world, all partnered or affiliated with or working somehow with the famous Anne Frank Museum in Amsterdam. And so there are Anne Frank organizations across the world. In the U.S., I was head of the U.S. Anne Frank organization, which basically I turned into a civil and human rights organization. And we spoke out, and I want to touch the third rail here, and I want people to listen carefully. We spoke out about the parallels of Germany from the 1930s until 1942, and what we're seeing today. And I want to be very careful. In no way am I comparing President Trump to the leader of Germany then. In no way am I comparing it to the Holocaust. I am comparing the stages before the Holocaust to the stages of authoritarianism that exist today. The stages are so similar in how Germany worked to change society to hate Jews, and what Donald Trump has done to change too many Americans' minds.
In Germany, they passed the Nuremberg laws. There were statutes. Thank God the Congress hasn't passed any anti-immigrant.
Okay, but it's not for Donald Trump's
Everything
lack of
he's doing
trying.
is executive orders, which are...
Executive order,
yeah.
which is, it bodes terribly for the presidency.
Yes.
I would say this even if a Democrat were in. We have Congress. These executive orders left and right that are a substitute for legislation, it's awful.
Well, the Congress has abdicated its role.
It's
There's
abdicated.
No question.
It's abdicated.
Yeah.
So we're seeing authoritarianism today. But as I write in my book, I saw what made Donald Trump likable to his base.
His base.
And when he advocated policies that weren't even in their interests, I would look at Republican conventions sometimes, and who's ever on the podium would speak about tax cuts basically for the rich, and people who are not rich in the audience, although that's not easy to find at a Republican convention, but people who are not rich are applauding.
Because it's aspirational.
It's
they want to
aspirational.
be rich too.
They-
That's part
right,
of it.
right. And there are Trump supporters who I've seen applaud when a Republican would call for a reduction in the capital gains tax. What are they applauding for, poor people? It not only does it not affect them, it affects them terribly because we're going to get less revenue to help poor people. And they're applauding for a capital gains tax
The
cut.
applauding
That's
is
nuts.
part of the tribalism. If
It is
it's
that.
like if Obama said it,
But
you
it's
got to
the
be
cult,
against
it's
it.
the cult of
Yeah,
personality.
Exactly.
It's the cult of personality.
Do you predict he's going to be around for the next election? What's your prediction? I've got a lot of dinners I'm going to have to give to people. On
So
my
I
predictions.
actually believe it's 50-50.
Okay.
That he'll be around the next election, that Donald Trump could be replaced. If he's not removed from office, and as you know and the audience knows, impeachment is only the equivalent of an indictment of a charge in the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate has to remove.
We need 20 Republicans.
If we don't get that, Trump is going to be newly emboldened.
I know. We won't. That's
But if he's newly emboldened, he will be reckless. Listen, he was newly emboldened by the fact that Robert Mueller didn't quite deliver the goods that Democrats expected. That's how we got Ukraine. Trump was emboldened. He thought they're never going to catch
as
him on
I was
anything.
reading your book,
Right.
I thought of you exactly. I said, "My God, Stephen needed to talk to Mueller. He's missing some steps in his, no question about it. He was terrible.
It was a shock. I mean,
Okay.
so there's an instance where likability mattered so much in America's perception. The problem with the Mueller hearings was not the evidence that Mueller found, that was plentiful. Mueller himself did not come across as likable.
And the Democrats didn't know how to use it either to
Right.
their best advantage.
Yeah,
so
but Mueller was flat.
He was-
To use a word in Yiddish, he was fumfering. He was looking for words in his head. It made him seem, well, you don't even know the report you're talking about. He didn't deliver the personality goods.
Exactly.
And that's really what hurt us. As we tape this, it was only yesterday that the two witnesses the Democrats brought, including Ambassador Bill Taylor, spoke. And Bill Taylor was actually a masterful witness. I will say that the hearings overall was slightly flat, but Taylor was a masterful
good,
witness.
yeah.
If Bob Mueller were as talented in presentational skills as Ambassador Taylor, I don't know that
he
Trump
might
would
have
be in
been in
office.
his prime. He just was not in his prime. That was part of it.
It was,
Yeah.
frankly, it was painful to watch that he was not in his prime.
It hurt. Yeah.
But it's painful for me to watch as somebody, listen, take Joe Biden. It's not, Sheila, a matter of age. Look at Bernie Sanders, and I'm not saying I support Bernie
know.
Sanders for president. I'll say this about Bernie Sanders, even though he had a heart attack, and I'm glad his health is back. He comes across as vigorous. I'll give him that.
The way Trump does.
The way Trump does.
I worry about Biden on the stage.
Right,
Trump,
so
Trump will overwhelm him personality-wise.
Biden is a likable person. When I was a staffer in the U.S. Congress, I worked with him. He is one of the kindest, menchiest, greatest people. He really is. Like, what people say about him publicly, it actually is true behind
He
the scenes.
screwed up the Anita Hill thing.
But
Come on.
he screwed it up terribly.
so.
Oh, it was inexcusable what he did to Anita Hill. He's gotten wrong advice. He should have given an apology years ago.
Right.
And he has never given her a full apology.
So you think
he's flawed.
He's likable, but he's not likable enough.
Listen, right, nobody is perfectly likable.
Except Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks is
Okay.
perfectly likable.
You talk about in your book. So likability also is important because it leads to more money. You talk about it in corporations.
Mm-hmm.
If the CEO is likable,
I do.
the company is going to make more money for its shareholders. If Tom Hanks is likable, the picture will be a blockbuster. And now he's got a picture where he's doing Mr. Rogers.
So let me say this, but here's the good side about likability. Or you could say it's the bad side. It's the great democratizing factor in American life. you don't need a college degree or advanced training or decades of experience to have an opinion on whether somebody's likable. Smart people and people who might not have had equal education, people from all walks of life, we all have a likability prism.
So is it part of what I would call just chemistry or the it factor? You can't quantify it?
Yes. So, Sheila, as I write in my book, likability doesn't mean that a person's nice. You know, I'm often asked when I've worked for famous people, oh, what's so-and-so really like? Are they nice? That's the first question people ask. Is Oprah nice? Was Chuck Schumer nice? Was Frank Lautenberg nice? People I worked for. Yes, yes to all. But that's not what likability is. I define likability as having the very dynamic personality traits that encourage other people to enter an emotional relationship with you. So that's how I would say Donald Trump was liked. Listen, Donald Trump's supporters wouldn't say he was a nice man. Like, nobody would say he was a nice man. But they liked him because they believed he was protecting them, standing up for them, that he was a fighter.
Okay, but so the other question is, can you help people become likable? In other words, can you take someone and with all of your public relations experience, turn someone who intrinsically is not a likable person?
In most cases, yes. So I say in my book, likability, I call it a construct, meaning likability is manufactured to a point. If a person doesn't have a personality trait, for example, among my 8 traits I write about relatability. Listen, if a person is stuffy and not warm and not friendly, I'm not going to make that person come across as the warmest, friendliest person in the entire world. I can help, but I couldn't possibly go all the way. Likability is based on a kernel of truth that exists in that person's personality and blowing that up out of proportion.
Okay.
Right, and you have to bring that out. I have worked for I've worked with some of the most compelling people, and I've also worked with boring people. And
so can you make a boring person likable?
That's the most hard thing. That's the most difficult thing in the entire world.
Yeah.
Well,
I was telling you,
the worst sin in public life is to actually be boring.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I was telling you, as a lawyer, in your career, you've been able to choose. When you had the case in New Jersey in the Garden State Equality, you were able to choose a policeman who was likable, who had a great story, a compelling story.
We actually auditioned plaintiffs.
Okay, but as an attorney.
Yep.
I had clients who were very boring, miserable people, and I had to project their cases and make a story and make them more likable. It's very difficult, right, to do that. You had the ability to make that construct, to go out and find, just like in the same-sex marriage cases, we found plaintiffs who had compelling stories as couples and so on, right? So it's hard when you're dealing with real people in the real world sometimes.
Yeah, I can give you an example. We actually went out and yes, we actually did screen tests on tape of potential plaintiffs.
Right.
And I'm going to have to clean up this story a bit. Right? Until about 10 years ago, a significant segment of society was far more accepting of two women together versus 2 men. Like, to some in society, 2 men making out, ooh, I can't watch. Let's just say that some men are not disturbed by 2 women making out. Do you get my drift?
Yes, okay.
This is public access. I don't mean for this to be PG-13.
Yeah, we don't have too many kids.
We have too many kids. So, at the time, I was well aware that women couples would sell better than male couples. We had 7 plaintiffs, but the ones we would choose to put out in front, right? And there was 2 women that were that we made the stars of our marriage equality campaign in New Jersey, who were plaintiffs. And the 2 women were about old enough to be grandparents. So people like them because they saw two sweet, wonderful women, grandparents. Well, what's the harm in getting them married? They didn't even go to whether these people had sex.
Right, right.
It was just two
Right.
wonderful. They remind me of my
But
grandmother.
with the guys, you could picture the sex. With the women, you couldn't picture the sex. Is that the idea?
Yeah, the guys would have to be. We chose one couple. I never saw two more macho guys in the whole world. Like, both had deep voices. Listen, my gaydar is impeccable, right? Impeccable as a gay person. So when they came to my office, for me, I actually said, I'm being blunt. I said, really, are they members of our community? Very, very macho. Very, very macho. It worked.
It worked.
It worked.
It worked.
It worked. They related to people. I'm not saying that this was proper or not proper. We met people, the audience, where it was.
Okay, you got it. So before we finish, people have to read the book and see all the other personalities you talk about, from CEOs to movie stars to people in the arts everywhere. Let's just go through quickly. We're running out of time. I could talk to you forever. The 8 traits of likability. Captivation, when you first meet.
8 traits of likability. I say in this book that people fall in like with public figures in the same way that people fall in love with a potential spouse. And I say it comes in 4 stages of 2 personality stages each. At first, the public figure reveals whether he or she is captivating and hopeful. Second stage, whether the person is authentic and relatable. The third stage is whether the person is protective and reliable. And finally, whether the person is compassionate and perceptive. In those 4 stages, each of those traits in a pair are symbiotic or relates to the other.
So just being captivating is not enough.
No, because here's the deal. Being captivating means you could be Omarosa or some other villain on a reality show. So there are many captivating people in public life who grab our attention, and then we go past that and we go, yuck.
Yeah, so you have
but they give us the first look.
You have to hope it's going to lead to something more.
Right.
Okay, and then you have to think, are they authentic? They're not a fraud,
Yes,
they're not fooling
but
me.
let me say this. Authenticity in public life was the most challenging for me to write because the public doesn't want authenticity. The public is looking for an escape. The public wants people to speak in sound bites. The public wants antics, right? And so whenever you hear an expert on TV say the public is looking for authenticity, change the channel. That expert's wrong.
Okay, we're going to go through quickly. It's giving me the signal. So we talked about relatability. Got to be able to have something in common, right? Protectiveness, reliability, perceptiveness, and compassion. And each one of these, if you read the book, has sub-traits underneath them all.
And so at the end of the book, I have a self-diagnostic where, after I talk about the 300 stars of Hollywood, politics, and business, I present all 8 traits and 3 sub-traits in each. And I allow the reader to test his or her likability.
Excellent. All right. It's been great meeting you. Good luck with the book.
Awesome.
We'll see you at
Thank
Connecticut
you so
College
much.
tonight.
Can't wait.
And this is it for Talk Back. See you next time. Bye. Okay.